Hey everyone, here today to talk about American entry into World War II, which better be a review for you because you should have learned this last year. I'm sure you already know this, but the reason we got involved in World War II is because the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor. So let's move on. Alrighty. Early on in World War II, most of you probably remember this, but the Americans did not get involved in the war. The Americans basically declared neutrality. Which means they didn't really want to get involved in the war. In fact, early on in the war, roughly 2.5% of Americans actually favored joining the war. So they really had no interest in getting involved in the war. What Americans did have interest in doing, once again, is arming the combatants and allowing them to buy American weapons to fight the war, which basically the British were the ones that did that. Okay, so there was kind of a policy of if you have cash, you got weapons, and we would sell these guys weapons, mostly the British, like I said. Maybe a little bit the French, but that was probably just the British. So anyways, early on, like I said, really not getting involved. FDR, though, our president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he's really a big fan of supporting the British and really wants to get involved, in the war. And so Roosevelt, even though he can't convince the American people to kind of follow him right away, FDR starts taking steps to get the Americans ready to fight a war when it eventually does happen. And so FDR slowly starts to prepare us for war. He basically initiates a massive peacetime draft, so drafting people into the military in a time of peace, which back then was kind of unheard of to do it in the numbers that he did it. So 1.2 million Americans are drafted, and basically we start training for war. Okay. He also does what he can to continue to help the British out. For instance, I'm sure you remember some of this stuff. We make a deal with the British. We give them 50 Navy destroyers. That's a destroyer to the British, and in return we get to use their bases. Okay, this is called the Destroyers for Bases deal. Once again, just trying to help the British fight the Nazis in whichever way we can. And then eventually what happens is FDR institutes his very famous Lend-Lease plan, where he gets dangerously close to basically breaking neutrality. What this basically means is the British run out of money. The British run out of money eventually, and by 1940, 1941, they kind of really don't have any money left. So they can't buy American goods anymore. They can't buy American weapons. And so what FDR basically comes up with is he basically says the British can basically borrow. We can borrow them the weapons. They can pay us back later or give us the weapons back at some point. But basically he says we're going to borrow these guys weapons because they are fighting in a fight that we should be supporting. And he was very well known for using an analogy called the fire hose analogy, where he basically said, if your neighbor's house is on fire next door, wouldn't you obviously lend them your fire hose so they could go ahead and try to put out their fire? Same to the British. The British are facing an issue. They're facing the Germans. Clearly the Germans are our allies, so shouldn't we basically give them what they need to fight this war? Okay. But basically what starts to slowly pull the Americans into the war is, once again, the Germans unleash their U-boats, and U-boats start to sink ships, which starts to make Americans angry. Eventually, FDR actually institutes a plan called the shoot-on-sight policy. A lot of people don't know about this. The shoot-on-sight policy was basically an order FDR gave to the American Navy. This is before we're actually in the war. That if you see a U-boat, sink it. And so before Pearl Harbor actually happened, the American Navy and the German Navy were actually having an unofficial war going on in the Atlantic Ocean. So we had started to kind of go after them. Also, before we were technically in the war, FDR made an agreement with Churchill, who was the leader of the British, called the Atlantic Charter. And we just made a bunch of agreements. In there, we made agreements about what a post-World War II would look like, and FDR also promises Churchill that the Americans will enter the war. Okay, so at this point, war seems to be very, very close. it's only a matter of time before the Germans and the Americans are at war, but the American people still just aren't ready to kind of follow FDR and jump into that war. And I think we all know, obviously, what brings the American people into World War II. And that, of course, is the day of infamy, the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Japanese launch a surprise attack on our naval base in Hawaii. It is a smashing success for the Japanese. We are completely unprepared for this attack. The Americans suffer some, pretty bad casualties here. 2,400 American sailors are killed. Our Pacific fleet is decimated. We lose lots of battleships and destroyers and stuff like that. Really, the only positive for the Americans is that our aircraft carriers just so happen to be on some exercises out in the Pacific Ocean and were not sunk. People always, tend to wonder, why did the Japanese attack us? What was the reasoning behind this? And the bottom line is the Japanese just felt threatened by the Americans. The Japanese wanted to kind of be the big dogs in the Pacific, and they looked at us as kind of being a threat to their dominance in the Pacific. And so the Japanese were looking to basically knock us out of the Pacific Ocean. They never were thinking about doing an invasion of our country or anything like that. And what Pearl Harbor was meant to be, it was meant to be just kind of a massive hammer blow on our forces to just completely destroy the Navy, leave us with no Navy to protect the West Coast, and then force us to sign a peace treaty with them. And that was their goal. I mean, they almost accomplished it, but they never completely finished our Navy off, and the Americans were able to hang on, rebuild, and eventually take out the Japanese. But anyways, I have some pictures here I wanted to show you. Here are some pictures taken by the Japanese planes that are attacking our base at Pearl Harbor. Here you can see the USS Oklahoma getting hit by what appears to be a torpedo. So it looks like a torpedo kind of went like that and then hit the USS Oklahoma, and there you can see the water kind of blowing up into the air, signifying a hit. Okay. Also here you see the USS West Virginia, which is once again another battleship of ours. Back then battleships were kind of like the most important ships. We did have aircraft carriers at this point, but I don't think anyone really realized that aircraft carriers were going to be as important as we later found out that they would be. But here you can see all the oil from the USS West Virginia kind of spilling out from its tanks. And what we know happens is that as our ships get hit, American sailors jump into the water, and pretty soon this water that is covered in oil actually ignites, and there's actually a fire on the water. And many American sailors who are casualties of this attack are very, very badly burned, and some of the stories are very grotesque and very sad. How some people were so badly burned that when people tried to pull them out of the water, they would grab their arm and their skin would like literally melt off and stuff like that. So very, very bad conditions there for our sailors at Pearl Harbor. And then perhaps the most infamous casualty of Pearl Harbor was the USS Arizona. The USS Arizona, I don't know if I have a picture, that's a better picture there. The USS Arizona was one of our, once again, big battleships, and the Japanese were able to drop a bomb that went right through the deck of the Arizona, and the bomb went right into the room where we held all of our like shells and our gunpowder and stuff like that. And it blew up in that room, and apparently the explosion was so great that it literally picked the ship out of the water for a moment and then like slammed it down almost instantaneously. And memory fails me here, but I'm pretty sure that of the 24 people that died in Pearl Harbor, I'm pretty sure that 1,000 or more are basically still in their grave in the Arizona. So if you go to Pearl Harbor today in Hawaii, you can take a ferry out and you can go to the kind of memorial or museum of the USS Arizona, where the people are still entombed in the ship. And you can look down and see it. Obviously, here's where the big guns were, right here, and stuff like that. And the USS Arizona actually still has all the oil still in its tanks, and they call it the tears of the Arizona because every day there's just like little drops of oil that kind of go to the surface. And they say that's the the tears of all the people that are still entombed in the Arizona, crying or whatever. So anyways. So clearly, the Pearl Harbor attacks launched America into World War II. Germany quickly declares war on us after this happens because a great country never gets declared war on. FDR gives his very famous speech where he says, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by the naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounded determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. So once again, a very famous speech in American history there. Other interesting quotes on Pearl Harbor. Admiral Halsey, who was commanding our aircraft carriers during that attack, that were not there, obviously. When he entered Pearl Harbor and saw the destruction, he was quoted as saying, before we're through with them, the Japanese language will be spoken only in hell. Which kind of, I guess, shows you the anger that was held by many Americans after this day. And then finally, the mastermind of the Pearl Harbor attacks, Admiral Yamamoto, very, very intelligent admiral. He actually was trained by the Americans, went to our naval school and stuff like that. Very smart dude. He has a bunch of quotes that I think are very telling and kind of foreshadow what's to come. He does it very well. He is quoted as saying that if I am told to fight, I shall run wild for the first 6 months, but I have utterly no confidence for the second or third year. And I love this quote because that's pretty much what happens. The Japanese, when they initially attack the Americans, see some initial success. But the bottom line is that the American industrial capacity is so vast that the Americans can replace their losses. The Americans can field a vastly superior navy than the Japanese can. And Yamamoto knows this, and he knows that while the Japanese might have some early successes, that the Americans will eventually overwhelm them. And so he's basically very skeptical that the Japanese will be able to hold on to the gains that they have. And in fact, it's his second quote that some people debate if it's actually something that he said, but he might have said something to the effect of, I fear all we have done is awaken a sleeping giant. So, two very interesting quotes from Yamamoto there.